You think your mind is clear, yet your patterns never really change. You feel awake, but your reactions repeat like a quiet hidden script. If you truly owned your clarity, many people around you would panic. Psychological clarity is not about feeling smart. It is about seeing invisible contracts running your behavior. When your mind is clear, you notice who benefits from your reactions. You notice who relaxes when you doubt yourself and who tenses when you become confident. This small observation already separates powerful minds from ordinary ones. Ordinary minds focus on events. Powerful minds focus on patterns repeated across many events. Manipulators always study patterns, because patterns stay loyal even when people pretend to change. Every manipulator understands one silent rule: never fight a clear mind directly. Instead, they create fog around your interpretation of reality. The event stays the same, yet your conclusion shifts slowly. You start believing you deserved that disrespect. You start explaining away emotional exhaustion as your own weakness. Each time you reinterpret in their favor, your clarity breaks a little more. They are not just controlling your mood, they are training your inner courtroom that decides who is guilty. Machiavelli once said, if you control perception, you rarely need force. Notice he did not say if you control reality, he said perception. Manipulators rarely change actual facts, they only change which facts you focus on. They highlight your mistakes and mute your strengths until your self-image becomes unbalanced. Then they push one more step. They convince you that your confusion is humility and their certainty is wisdom. The moment you accept this trade, your psychological clarity is officially outsourced. Psychological clarity begins with one brutal question: whose voice is speaking inside your doubt? When you hesitate before taking a decision, listen closely. Is the hesitation protecting you from real danger or only from their disapproval? When you feel guilty, ask which standard you violated, your own or theirs. Ordinary minds never ask these questions. They assume every inner discomfort means they are wrong. Powerful minds separate real conscience from planted guilt. Manipulators survive only inside that confusion between the two. Emotional draining always starts as confusion about responsibility. A draining person constantly exports their internal chaos into your mental space. They do it by turning their feelings into your obligations. Whenever they feel insecure, you must reassure. Whenever they feel angry, you must calm. Whenever they feel bored, you must entertain. You think you are kind, you think you are supportive, yet slowly your nervous system starts carrying weight that never belonged to you. Psychological clarity is the moment you finally say, this pressure is not mine. Albert Bandura once said, if people define situations as real, their consequences become real. Manipulators weaponize this principle every day. They define a harmless disagreement as betrayal, and your brain reacts as if you actually betrayed someone. They define their emotional meltdown as your failure, and you accept the emotional bill. Reality has not changed, yet your body pays the cost. This is why psychological clarity is a law, not a luxury. Without it, you suffer from stories that never truly happened. Powerful minds practice a specific habit. They separate description from reality before reacting. When someone says you made everything worse, they do not instantly believe it. They measure facts against the statement. They replay the conversation internally. They check earlier patterns. Has this person blamed them each time something felt uncomfortable? Has this story appeared before whenever the manipulator wanted control? This calm internal audit protects their energy. Meanwhile, ordinary minds rush to apologize, over-explain and over-fix, feeding the draining loop again. Manipulators fear one particular kind of clarity: the moment you name their pattern instead of defending yourself. When you say, this attack appears whenever I set a boundary, the game changes. You are no longer lost in details. You are watching the system. Once you see the system, your emotions uncouple from their script. Their anger stops feeling like proof of your failure. It only becomes data. At that point, they either escalate or quietly search for another target who still lives inside fog. You never noticed how many of your daily reactions are pre-programmed by invisible psychological contracts. You try to calm everyone because you secretly agreed to carry discomfort for them. You over-explain every small decision because you secretly agreed that your judgment is not enough. You stay despite feeling drained because you secretly agreed that leaving makes you selfish. Each contract was signed under emotional pressure, not clear thinking. The real divide is simple. Will you examine these contracts or continue obeying them without reading? Because if psychological clarity truly separates powerful minds from ordinary ones, then the next disturbing realization is this: how many of your current loyalties are actually powered by clarity instead of fear? You believe your decisions are yours, but someone already shaped your emotional reactions. You trust your intuition, yet most of it was trained by repeated pressure. You think you observe people clearly, but you only see what your mind allows. Psychological clarity becomes dangerous for manipulators when you start noticing emotional engineering. They do not control you through force, they control you through subtle calibration. They reward the reactions that benefit them and punish the ones that protect you. Each reward rewires your confidence, each punishment rewires your fear. Slowly you begin predicting their emotional weather before making any move. This is not intuition, this is conditioning disguised as care. Ordinary minds confuse emotional intensity with truth. Powerful minds ask one question: who gains control if I believe this feeling? A draining person always escalates small discomfort into heavy emotional storms. Their goal is simple: exhaust you until you surrender the decision-making. When your mental energy drops, your clarity collapses. You stop checking patterns and start reacting to tone. This is where influence becomes quiet domination. You follow not because you agree, but because you want relief. Machiavelli once said if people fear losing peace, they accept subtle chains willingly. Manipulators create selective peace. They give calm only when you comply. They withdraw calm whenever you assert. Your brain learns one conclusion: compliance equals safety. Resistance equals chaos. This silent formula becomes the hidden law that shapes your choices. You think you are choosing harmony, but you are choosing escape from discomfort artificially designed for control. Emotional draining starts with minor distortions. A draining person treats your boundaries as attacks, your needs as demands, your silence as disrespect, your stress as inconvenience. They rewrite every situation until you feel responsible for their emotional balance. This is not care, this is psychological theft. They steal your clarity by turning their instability into your duty. Each time you try to stabilize them, you destabilize yourself a little more. Albert Bandura once said, if self-observation weakens, people lose their sense of agency. Manipulators weaponize this by creating constant self-doubt. They interrupt your clarity with targeted confusion. They say you misunderstood when you noticed a pattern. They say you overreacted when you finally protected yourself. They say you changed when you stopped tolerating draining behavior. Each statement aims to collapse your internal reference points. Once your reference points weaken, you start believing their version over your lived experience. Powerful minds reverse this strategy by running a simple internal scan before responding. They ask, is this guilt real or injected? Is this responsibility mine or assigned? Is this feeling mine or transferred? These questions rebuild clarity from the inside. Once clarity sharpens, your emotional reactions stop being predictable. Manipulators hate unpredictability because it breaks their reward-punishment cycle. You step out of their pattern, and suddenly their influence feels smaller than ever. There is a hidden truth most people never confront. Emotional clarity exposes hidden loyalties that should have ended long ago. You stay close to draining people because your mind remembers the version they showed you when they needed you most. You stay loyal to outdated memories while ignoring current patterns, draining your peace. Psychological clarity cuts this illusion. It shows you that someone's past kindness cannot erase their present manipulation. It forces you to face the uncomfortable shift from who they were to who they became. Ordinary minds avoid this realization because it breaks emotional comfort. Powerful minds accept it because it restores mental freedom. Once clarity rises, you start noticing who drains you in silence. You sense the heaviness before words appear. You detect the guilt trap before it forms. You see the emotional debt they want you to pay again. And this is where the unseen transformation begins. Because the deeper you go into psychological clarity, the more disturbing the next question becomes. If someone benefits from your confusion, then who are you becoming when you finally stop being confused? You think you choose your reactions, but your mind follows hidden shortcuts. You believe you see intentions clearly, yet your perception is shaped by pressure. You assume you are thinking, yet you mostly respond to emotional triggers. Psychological clarity becomes rare because most people never examine the source of their emotional urgency. Manipulators exploit urgency because urgency disables logic. When you feel pushed to answer quickly, you stop evaluating motives. You stop checking patterns. You stop verifying meaning. You only try to end the tension. This is how influence becomes invisible. The faster you respond, the more control you surrender. Ordinary minds confuse speed with intelligence. Powerful minds understand that delay protects clarity. A manipulator fears your pause more than your argument. The moment you pause, you disconnect from their emotional current. You stop absorbing their tone. You stop inheriting their fear. You stop accepting their interpretation. That pause is psychological resistance. It is the first crack in their influence system. Machiavelli once said, if a mind cannot slow down, it becomes easy to direct. This is why manipulators provoke urgency. They frame simple decisions as critical. They turn small misunderstandings into crises. They inject panic into normal communication. The goal is not chaos, the goal is compliance. Inside urgency, you react to their feelings instead of your values. Each rushed reaction creates micro-training. They learn which emotional triggers control you and which ones fail. You never notice the pattern because you are too busy reacting. Emotional draining intensifies when urgency becomes the standard atmosphere. A draining person constantly pulls you into emotional alarms. Every issue becomes dramatic, every disagreement becomes dangerous, every boundary becomes offensive. You begin managing their mood instead of your own clarity. Your nervous system stays in permanent alert. This alertness destroys your ability to see manipulation because you focus on solving the moment instead of studying the pattern. Clarity cannot grow in chaos, intentionally designed by someone else. Albert Bandura once said, if people lose the ability to self-regulate, they lose their identity. Manipulators attack self-regulation by using emotional unpredictability. One day they praise you intensely, the next day they withdraw completely. Sometimes they respond calmly, sometimes they explode over small issues. Your mind becomes busy predicting their mood instead of protecting your peace. This instability makes their approval feel valuable and their anger feel dangerous. Once you reach that stage, you become psychologically dependent on restoring their balance. Powerful minds break this cycle by separating emotional noise from real information. They ask, does this urgency reflect actual danger or only emotional pressure? They ask, is this inconsistency accidental or strategic? They ask, why does this person's mood dominate the entire interaction? These questions pull the mind out of reactive mode. Each question cuts one thread of influence. Clarity grows the moment you evaluate instead of absorb. Psychological clarity also reveals a hidden moral distortion many people carry silently. You think protecting their emotions makes you a good person. You think absorbing their chaos makes you strong. You think fixing their instability proves loyalty. None of this is clarity, it is emotional training imposed by draining personalities. They convince you that your worth depends on your ability to tolerate their intensity. Once this belief settles, you will ignore every red flag to protect the connection. Ordinary minds rationalize manipulation to maintain peace. Powerful minds recognize that false peace is the most expensive form of self-betrayal. Clarity exposes the truth that someone benefiting from your confusion is not protecting you. They are feeding on the part of you that fears confrontation. They are strengthening the version of you that stays silent. And once you see through this emotional urgency, another unsettling question rises quietly. How many decisions in your life were never yours, but products of someone else's emotional pressure disguised as truth? You believe you understand people, yet you ignore the signals revealing hidden intentions. You feel emotionally aware, yet you miss the shifts that rewrite your reality. You think your mind is stable, yet you carry reactions shaped by someone else. Psychological clarity becomes threatening to manipulators when you start noticing micro-distortions. These distortions are small enough to look harmless but powerful enough to reshape your identity. A subtle comment about your tone, a quiet question about your decisions, a gentle doubt slipped into your confidence. They never attack directly. They weaken clarity by cutting one thread at a time. You think you are adjusting, but you are actually shrinking. Ordinary minds judge moments individually. Powerful minds study the entire sequence. Manipulators rely on isolated interpretation because isolation hides patterns. When every disturbing moment is viewed separately, you never notice the repetition. Yet every repetition whispers the truth. Someone is draining your psychological strength while pretending to guide you. Clarity is the ability to connect these scattered dots into one undeniable structure. Machiavelli once said, if you control what people remember, you control what they fear. Manipulators do this through selective memory framing. They remind you of every mistake while forgetting every improvement. They highlight every flaw while muting every effort. They store your weaknesses like a private archive and bring them out only when you gain confidence. Each reminder is a psychological anchor pulling you back to doubt. You feel guilty for growing because they keep you tied to outdated versions of yourself. Emotional draining deepens when your self-perception becomes dependent on someone's emotional reactions. If they approve, you feel capable. If they withdraw, you feel defective. Your internal compass stops working. You navigate by their mood instead of your values. This is not connection, this is conditioning. It is a slow erosion of identity disguised as empathy. Albert Bandura once said, if external evaluation dominates inner evaluation, personal agency collapses. Manipulators exploit this collapse. They push you to seek their validation for minor things. They train you to ask for permission without noticing. They reward self-doubt with temporary kindness. They punish independence with subtle rejection. Your clarity becomes a hostage. Your confidence becomes conditional. Your identity becomes negotiable. Powerful minds escape this trap by performing mental separation, a process where they divide facts from emotional interpretations. They ask what actually happened without emotional coloring. They ask what meaning was added artificially. They ask who benefited from that meaning. This separation reveals the psychological fingerprints of manipulation. Once you see the fingerprints, the illusion breaks. Psychological clarity also forces a disturbing realization about emotional draining. Draining people do not want resolution. They want continuation. They create problems they do not want solved because the problem keeps you tied to them. If peace arrives naturally, their control weakens. If clarity rises, their tactics fail. They keep the emotional environment slightly tense because tension ensures your loyalty. Psychological clarity exposes this system instantly. Ordinary minds confuse emotional familiarity with emotional safety. Powerful minds recognize that familiarity can be the cage that hides the manipulation most effectively. Many people stay drained because they mistake exhaustion for loyalty and confusion for connection. Clarity wipes this illusion clean. And once this clean observation forms, the next unsettling question rises sharply. If someone consistently shapes your self-doubt, then how much of your identity has been built from distortions rather than truth? You think your identity is solid, yet it bends whenever pressure increases. You believe your boundaries are firm, yet they melt when someone pushes emotionally. You assume your clarity is stable, yet it collapses in the presence of certain people. Psychological clarity becomes rare because most people never study their emotional thresholds. Manipulators study them with precision. They learn how much pressure makes you justify their behavior. They learn how much silence makes you panic. They learn which tone pulls guilt out of you instantly. These thresholds become the control panel of your mind. Once they know the panel, they never need force, only small adjustments. Ordinary minds react to emotional pressure automatically. Powerful minds examine the pressure before responding. A manipulator never wants you to examine, they want you to surrender. This is why emotional pressure often appears right after you do something independent. You take a small stand and they respond with silence. You set a boundary and they respond with irritation. You express a need and they respond with disappointment. The pattern is not random, it is strategic conditioning. Machiavelli once said, if you weaken a mind softly, it forgets it was ever strong. Manipulators weaken softly. They never break you in one moment, they break you through tiny shifts. One guilt trap here, one emotional withdrawal there, one exaggerated reaction to your independence, one quiet punishment for your confidence. Over time, these moments shape new reflexes. You stop asserting because assertion brings conflict. You stop expressing because expression brings tension. You stop thinking for yourself because thinking brings emotional cost. Emotional draining escalates when your body begins predicting emotional consequences automatically. You think you are choosing peace, but your nervous system is choosing survival. You avoid certain words to prevent conflict. You censor your needs to avoid guilt. You adjust your energy to stabilize their mood. You change your decisions to prevent emotional backlash. None of these choices come from clarity, they come from internalized control. This is how manipulation becomes self-maintained even in their absence. Albert Bandura once said, if behavior is shaped by fear, identity becomes borrowed. Drained individuals borrow identity from the emotional strongest person in the environment. They adopt their preferences. They mirror their values. They absorb their emotional logic. The manipulation becomes internal. You stop needing the manipulator because the manipulator's voice now speaks inside your self-doubt. Clarity disappears because the internal and external influence blend into one voice. Powerful minds reclaim clarity by applying a ruthless mental audit. They review every belief and ask who taught me this reaction. They review every guilt and ask who benefits when I feel guilty. They review every fear and ask who gains control when I hesitate. This audit reveals how much of your emotional world was built by someone else's interests. Clarity begins when you reclaim ownership of meanings that were never yours. Psychological clarity also reveals a disturbing truth about draining personalities. They do not drain you because they need support. They drain you because your exhaustion prevents you from questioning their influence. As long as you stay tired, you stay compliant. As long as you stay emotionally responsible for them, you stop being responsible for yourself. Psychological clarity breaks the cycle by exposing the purpose behind your exhaustion. Ordinary minds treat exhaustion as normal. Powerful minds treat exhaustion as a signal. Exhaustion means boundaries were violated. Exhaustion means emotional responsibility was misplaced. Exhaustion means your mind is carrying weight that never belonged to it. When clarity sharpens, you stop fixing them and start observing them. You stop absorbing emotional noise and start analyzing hidden motives. And once this awareness rises fully, a new unsettling question forms. If your reactions were shaped by their pressure, then what would your life look like if your mind finally stopped responding to their emotional script? You think your inner voice is yours, yet it carries echoes of past pressure. You believe your thoughts are original, yet many were installed through repetition. You assume your clarity is complete, yet it has never been fully tested. Psychological clarity reaches its highest form when you finally confront the invisible architecture guiding your reactions. Every manipulator relies on one core advantage. You never question the origin of your thoughts. You question situations, you question emotions, but you rarely question the system shaping both. Clarity destroys this advantage instantly. It makes your mind unpredictable to anyone who once controlled it. Ordinary minds seek comfort in familiar emotional patterns, even if those patterns create exhaustion. Powerful minds seek truth even when truth disrupts everything. Manipulators fear this shift because clarity removes the emotional currency they use to control you. Their disappointment stops influencing you. Their silence stops scaring you. Their reactions stop defining your decisions. Your psychological weather no longer depends on their mood. Machiavelli once said, "If you remove fear, the chains fall by themselves." Psychological clarity removes fear by exposing its source. You realize you were not afraid of them, you were afraid of losing peace. But peace created through emotional submission is not peace, it is compliance. Manipulators never had real power, they only had your fear of conflict. Once that fear dissolves, their influence loses shape entirely. Emotional draining collapses when you stop absorbing transferred responsibility. A draining person cannot survive in the presence of someone who refuses emotional debt. When you no longer fix their feelings, they lose the mechanism that kept you tied. When you no longer rescue their instability, they face the emptiness they tried to escape through you. Their power depended on your instinct to overfunction. Clarity neutralizes that instinct. Albert Bandura once said, "If people regain agency, they rewrite their identity." Clarity restores agency by rebuilding your internal reference points. You begin trusting your own interpretation again. You begin valuing your boundaries without guilt. You begin protecting your energy without apology. You stop negotiating your worth based on someone else's emotional reactions. Your identity stops bending. Your decisions stop trembling. Your mind stops leaking power. Powerful minds practice a subtle discipline that ordinary minds avoid. They let discomfort reveal truth. When someone reacts aggressively to your clarity, you study their reaction instead of surrendering. When someone withdraws to punish you, you observe the tactic instead of absorbing guilt. When someone uses emotional chaos to control you, your mind stays still enough to see the intention behind the chaos. This stillness is the ultimate form of psychological clarity. Psychological clarity also exposes the silent rule behind every influence system. Manipulation survives in the dark, but collapses under awareness. Once you understand the mechanics, you cannot be controlled by them again. Once you recognize emotional traps, you cannot fall for the same pattern. Once you detach your worth from someone's reactions, you stop being a participant in their psychological game. Ordinary minds wait for external permission to break free. Powerful minds create their own permission. Clarity shows you that your mind was never weak, it was only distracted. Your reactions were never flawed, they were shaped. Your identity was never lost, it was buried under emotional obligations that were not yours. The moment you reclaim your mental territory, the manipulation loses its ecosystem. And now the final twist emerges like a silent revelation. If clarity can break every hidden influence controlling you, then the real question is simple and unsettling. Are you ready to meet the version of yourself that appears when nobody else's emotions control your mind anymore?